China could never be a substitute for India because the diktats of geography said so. History said so. That Nepal's historical linkages are with India. His Nepalese citizens have shed blood for the defense of India. It's not so with China. With China, our conflict is primarily territorial conflict, border conflict. We have a border dispute and the conflict is on the alignment of the border. With Pakistan, our conflict is more ideological. Pakistan, as a byproduct of two-nation theory, poses an existential ideological threat to secular India and vice versa.
Hello, good evening, namaste, and welcome to Chaitya Media. My name is Sharan Sethi, and I'll be your host for this program. Joining us today for a conversation is Captain Alok Bansal. He's the director of India Foundation. Sir, thank you so much. Very good evening and namaste.
Namaste.
So very clearly, we've commemorated what's happened during 26/11 again very recently. And since then, it's been a long journey for India because we've seen so many changes in the security apparatus. But before we dive into that, let me ask you this. What led to the events of 26/11? Because were we unprepared? Because we did get intel inputs from the CIA and Mossad, if reports are to be believed.
See, we need to understand that Pakistan and its premier intelligence agency, ISI, have been involved in terrorist acts inside India for quite some time. And they had been planning a big attack. The beauty was that they had planned an attack where they had the deniability. Because till then, the infiltration was through the land route where invariably one of the terrorists or somebody would leave a trace. So this time they used a medium which had not been used. And India's maritime boundary, as you know, is not very well guarded because we have a huge maritime boundary and our focus has been on our land frontiers. We did not have the infrastructure to monitor and observe every vessel passing through our waters. So this attack was planned and the aim was to carry out this ghastly attack and disappear without leaving any trace and then have a sense of deniability where they would have denied that this has been done by Pakistan or they had any involvement. They would have blamed it on India. And the targets that were chosen were such that would have caused chaos and would have derailed India's economy because Pakistan, especially its ISI, at this point of time was extremely concerned about the widening gap between the economic capabilities of India and Pakistan.
Right. And as far as the intelligence failure is concerned, even today the debate goes on and there is no, I mean, the previous governments have also not completely accepted the fact that, you know, they failed to act on time with the kind of inputs that we received. So, you know, from there to this point where we stand today, what are the changes that you see in India's security apparatus?
See, firstly, we need to understand when somebody talks of intel failure, please understand it's not that intelligence was not being given.
Right.
But the point is, if you give similar intelligence on 200 days out of 365, that intelligence loses its relevance.
Right.
So the security forces have been getting such intelligence on frequent basis and on repetitive basis. And when nothing happens, this sort of intelligence starts losing its salience because obviously you cannot be at heightened state of vigilance all through the year. Right. And that's what happened. Now, after 26/11, a lot of work has been done. And I think primarily as far as maritime security is concerned, things are being enhanced. Please understand, earlier we had no infrastructure whatsoever as far as maritime security was concerned. Now, coastal radar stations are being set up, but it is still a work in progress. And you need to understand that any day at night off a busy coast, you have thousands of boats at sea.
Right.
Now, which of these boats is indulged in genuine fishing, transiting from one point to another, or is carrying arms, ammunition, or terrorists is virtually impossible to make out because neither the Navy nor the Coast Guard can investigate each and every boat, because at sea, investigating a boat which is laden with fishes will take at least a few hours every single boat. And in one particular night, you can at the most investigate 2 or 3 boats, not more than that. So with that sort of a scenario, there will be always some boats which will get away. And what is even more important is that the most of the fishermen in Indian's coast are doing subsistence fishing. They don't have modern gadgetry. They are actually fishing to survive. With that sort of fishing boats, which have absolutely rudimentary infrastructure, some of them may be just a few planks of wood. How do you identify which fishing boat is genuine and which is not?
Right.
So that has been a process. I think after that, Government of India has taken a lot of steps to regulate fishing at sea. And more significantly, the state governments, which have the jurisdiction as far as immediate coastline is concerned, have started setting up coastal police stations and coastal police. But again, here, different states have acted in a different manner. And the coordination, which should be impeccable, is still not there. There are numerous agencies operating at sea, and there's a need for coordination. What India should look forward to is something like maritime traffic control centers. Like you have air traffic control, you should have a maritime traffic control centers where radar pictures should give you a picture of every single contact in Indian waters, and you should be able to guide a particular boat that you should go in this direction, go in this direction, go in this direction. The work on this has started. Large number of coastal radar stations are being set up. Coordination between agencies has improved, but still we have a long way to go.
Right. What about initiatives like NatGrid? I think was announced a few years ago when Rajnath Singh was the Home Minister. So does that sort of help build a decentralized effort in terms of analyzing the intelligence that we receive?
See, we are creating NatGrid, etc., but intelligence agencies by nature are secretive.
Right.
Their training is such that they don't usually want to part with information. So it will take time before the mutual confidence builds up, because in intelligence agencies, there is a fear that their sources should not get compromised. That's one of the key principles of intelligence. And consequently, intelligence agencies are very, very reluctant as far as sharing of information at the lower level is concerned, because the mutual confidence is not there. So that is where I think frequent meetings like NatGrid, etc., which have been done, interactions, do create a better environment where intelligence may get passed from one agency to another.
Right. It's actually quite complicated because it's the same institutions that we are talking about. And if we have to boost the cooperation between those agencies, it takes something beyond an institutional region, right? There needs to be a mechanism under which there can be a trustable share of information with every other agency that's involved in this effort.
See, undoubtedly, as I said, each agency has to understand the gravity of the situation, and each agency involved in this particular field must have the basic understanding of intelligence and maritime security. Unfortunately, maritime police stations were set up with individuals who had no understanding of sea. Most of the policemen who were delegated to coastal police stations were those which the state governments did not want, who were medically unfit. There were large number of people who were sent for this coastal policing duty who were medically unfit to go to sea. Boats that were provided did not get adequate diesel to patrol at night. So there have been some issues because maritime security does not get the sort of focus that a police force should get, because police force by nature of their duty is involved in far more lucrative jobs than to go into an inane patrolling at sea. So that's one of the reasons why the focus has been away. But as I said, all agencies need to have a fair amount of understanding as far as maritime security is concerned. They also need to be aware of the maritime domain. That's very important. The maritime domain awareness is very, very essential. They also need to understand the basic ingredients of intelligence as to how intelligence is.
So one more point that you were mentioning was very interesting, because just a few years back, you would see a lot of our fishermen, whether it's on the west coast or the south coast of India, being arrested by Sri Lanka and Pakistan respectively, but that has come down drastically. So is this, what do you attribute this to?
See, firstly, we need to understand that the two situations are different. With Pakistan, we don't have a maritime boundary delineation.
Right.
So people who are fishing at the extremities of India's maritime boundaries are invariably, as per Pakistan's perception, often fishing in their territory, and they often were apprehended. And this was actually a quid pro quo process which was going on. Recently, we had a very, very unfortunate incident where a Pakistani vessel actually fired at fishermen in these areas, which was actually very, very sad, which had never happened earlier. As regards Sri Lanka is concerned, the situation is different. With Sri Lanka, we have a maritime boundary delineation, but please understand, during prolonged civil war, the Sri Lankan fishermen were virtually prevented from coming out to sea. So invariably, the Indian fishermen were fishing in those waters. Now that the Sri Lankan fishermen have started coming out, there is a contestation. And also please understand, at sea, whereas the boundary starts and where it ends is very, very difficult process. And unless, of course, you have the modern gadgetry, the chances of your straying into another water is always there. More importantly, in Pak Bay, the better fishing grounds are towards Sri Lanka's side. So there is a tendency amongst Indian fishermen to stray into Sri Lankan waters, either by design or sometimes by mistake as well. So that has been the case. And that's where I think after the civil war, once the Sri Lankan fishermen have started coming out to sea, there is, of course, contestation.
So in terms of how our capabilities are with respect to blue water navy and brown water navy capabilities, could you sort of, tell us in detail as to where we stand today? Because on one hand, obviously, it is very important and imperative for India to prevent any future attacks like the 2611 from repeating again. But on the other hand, you also have the Chinese fleet and the Pakistani fleet, continuously invading into Indian territory, so to speak. So in that sense, there is that Sino-Pak nexus as well, which is going on. And there is the entire debate of freedom of navigation, which also comes into the picture. So having these complexities in mind, how would you think India should approach these issues going forward?
See, we need to understand that as far as Navy is concerned, it needs to look after both the requirements. It has to have a blue water component to dominate the Indian Ocean, have maintained sea control in the waters around India. And at the same time, after 2611, it has to focus on coastal security as well. Because Indian Navy has been designated as the lead agency for ensuring coastal security. Of course, as far as coastal security is concerned, it will have assets from other forces, because you have Coast Guard, you also have State Police, etc. Unfortunately, none of these agencies come directly under Indian Navy. Now, this coordination has been missed. So once we have given Indian Navy the responsibility as the lead agency for coastal security, we need a certain amount of coordination where State Police and Coast Guard, etc., must come under their control, and that must be done. But yeah, having said that, after 2611, large focus has been there, and large number of small coastal crafts, etc., have been acquired by the Navy. We have also set up coastal war watching stations, etc. We have a system by which we can actually look at coastal security. But as far as coastal security is concerned, the state government and other agencies come into play. Navy, of course, primary role is blue water, and where it has to dominate the oceans. We need to understand that Indian Navy is still the largest littoral navy as far as Indian Ocean is concerned. And we have managed to create a positive impression of our force as far as the littorals of Indian Ocean are concerned. And consequently, Indian Navy is seen as a benign force, which can be dependent upon by other countries. And there have been numerous occasions when the navies of other countries have sought our help to help them with the maritime security dimensions. If you go back almost a decade and a half back, Mozambique had requested India Navy to provide offshore security during OAU summit, when you had tsunami, we were there in the forefront to support countries. When Maldives had a freshwater crisis, Indian Navy was there to supply water to it. When citizens of India were entrapped into war zones, Indian Navy was there to evacuate them. And not only Indian Navy, many other countries in the local, in the neighborhood, their citizens were also evacuated by Indian Navy. And so much so that when we evacuated our citizens from Aden, even the United States sent an advisory that Indian Navy is withdrawing its citizens, or any American citizens wishing to come out should approach Indian embassy and get out from there. So that has been the case. So we have both the components. And as I said, as far as blue water component is concerned, Indian Navy's blue water component is fairly robust, but it needs to be strengthened further. And that is where we have a big problem that we have as of now only one aircraft carrier. The second aircraft carrier is undergoing sea trial. But we have not started work on our third aircraft carrier, which should have been started long back, because eventually India needs minimum of 3 operational aircraft carriers, one on each coast and one undergoing refit or reserve. That would be required. I think that has not been done. A large number of surface vessels have been added recently to our Indian fleet. But the problem is that matters maritime are not often well understood by either the politicians in this country or even the people who have not been to sea. I think because New Delhi is amongst one of the few capitals of a coastal state which is farthest from sea. So, so that maritime awareness as far as the policymakers is lacking. And that's one of the reasons why we have not been able to go for a third aircraft carrier, which we should have gone by now. At least the drawing, etc., should have started. The steel cutting should have started, so that the process starts, because it takes almost 8 to 10 years before, at least before that aircraft carrier would be out. And that will be essential, because if we have to, because China has been going very fast and has been building aircraft carriers at a very faster pace. So we will have to match, because at some stage Chinese Navy will start moving into Indian Ocean with strength. It's already moving into Indian Ocean, but it's not been able to move with that strength. So for that day, we need to be prepared.
Right. So in that sense, in the northern borders, especially after the Galwan Valley clash, China somehow became the main strategic competitor for India, drifting away from Pakistan after a long time. But we don't, as you rightly said, I think there is a disconnect with Delhi as far as maritime security is concerned, because nobody looks south. So in that sense, do you think we've been ignoring our sea borders for a very long time? And should we focus more on China than on Pakistan as far as maritime security is concerned?
See, there are 2-3 important facets which we need to understand. When we gained independence, initially we did focus on the Navy. As a result, Indian Navy was the first Navy in this part of the world to acquire an aircraft carrier. Because we had a vision at that point of time, a global vision. In the initial first decade, and Navy did get adequate attention. We had Lord Mountbatten as the first Governor General of Free India. Then Pandit Nehru had a global international vision. So we did focus. Unfortunately for us, early 60s, we had a conflict with China, then we had a conflict with Pakistan. Now, these threats were existential threats. These threats came from across the borders, and they threatened the very integrity of India. Now, as a result, for a fledgling economy like ours, we had to shift focus from the Navy to the land frontiers.
Right.
And for over next 2 decades plus, our focus was primarily on land frontiers, because that was an existential threat, because there was a threat to our integrity. It's only after once we had strengthened ourselves and reached a position where we could withstand, or we could give a befitting reply to our enemies across borders, that we started strengthening our Navy. Right. The second part, we need to understand that the Chinese Navy till recently was in no position to come to Indian Ocean. Right. So we had no maritime threat from China. In fact, China faced a maritime threat to its shipping from Indian Navy, because its shipping was vulnerable to Indian Navy in the Indian Ocean region. And for China, which actually has grown economically by garnering resources from across the oceans and exporting its finished goods to Europe, Africa, and America.
Right.
The trade or the shipping trade, maritime trade was extremely important. So this was a huge vulnerability of the Chinese. The third thing, as far as threat is concerned, we need to understand that for last 10, 15 years, last 10 years or so, our relations with China had improved considerably. Unfortunately, with Galwan and last 2-3 years, they have actually been derailed completely. In fact, we have gone back to where we were probably in 60s and 70s. That relationship has gone. We also need to understand that with China, our conflict is primarily territorial conflict, border conflict. We have a border dispute and the conflict is on the alignment of the border. With Pakistan, our conflict is more ideological. Pakistan, as a byproduct of two-nation theory, poses an existential ideological threat to secular India and vice versa. That fact must be understood. So, of course, in the maritime domain, at least in the foreseeable future, the only maritime threat which emanated was from Pakistan. It's only now that the Chinese Navy has started coming. And the good and the bad thing you can say is that the Chinese Navy is growing at a very faster pace. From a brown water Navy, it is moving into a blue water domain. So we need to be worried. Fortunately for us, geography has been very kind to us. We have an open access to seas on all three sides. Whereas in China's case, its access to sea is very, very restricted and dominated by other countries. So if we actually have good surveillance capabilities, we would be in a position to detect the movement of Chinese naval fleet much earlier than before they can pose a threat to us in the Indian Ocean region.
Right. So I understand where you're coming from, but what people also are saying is that it's very evident with the containment strategy that the Chinese have in mind. Sri Lanka is slowly being influenced, or rather is under the influence of China, and even Maldives, they're attempting the same. So there are a lot of countries within the Indian Ocean neighborhood where China has a very strong hold. So in that sense, are we too late, or is there a future where India will be the primary competitor for China in the Indian Ocean region, or will there be an international scenario where you see United States and French and different other powers, getting involved in this particular?
See, it's a very complicated thing which I just wanted to tell you. For a very long period, we believed in the 70s, we used to propagate Indian Ocean as a zone of peace, where we did not want external powers in Indian Ocean.
Right.
And it was a time when we thought, being the largest littoral power in this part of the world, we could probably dominate. And if Indian Ocean is free from external powers, it will be peaceful.
Right.
As far as India's neighborhood is concerned, China has always been trying to have good relations with them, because Chinese intentions vis-a-vis India are very, very contradictory. On one hand, China does not want that India should become an ally of the US and join a Western grouping against China. On the other hand, China also does not want that India should become a competitor for China in the global arena. Now, it has two dichotomous objectives.
Right.
So to meet the first objective, it does not have to get into an open confrontation with India. That's one of the reasons why relations had been improving for some time, because China did not wish to get into an open confrontation with India, because that would have pushed us more into the American lap. And that has happened, I think. If you see after Galwan, we have moved towards the Quad and all those things. The second was that to confine us to South Asia and not move on to the global arena, it has actually engaged with all India's neighbors, and to ensure that we remain confined to South Asia. But having said that, if you leave aside Pakistan, India's relations with most of its neighbors are far better than China. And that is, of course, dictates of geography. To say Sri Lanka has gone under Chinese influence will be extremely wrong. I agree. Under the present regime in Sri Lanka, relations between China and Sri Lanka have improved. But China by no stretch of imagination can supplant India as far as Sri Lanka is concerned.
Okay.
Similar is the case in Nepal,
And
where you had a communist government, and even there earlier. Now, of course, you don't have a government. China could never be a substitute for India because the diktats of geography said so, history said so. That Nepal's historical linkages are with India. His Nepalese citizens have shed blood for the defense of India. It's not so with China. To get something through China from the sea to Nepal costs many, many times more than what it costs to take them from Indian ports. Bhutan, of course, we have a special relationship. Other countries, Maldives, yes, previous regime, it was pro-China, but this regime has actually cancelled a lot of projects with China. In fact, we have very good relations with Maldives. Afghanistan also, till the Taliban entered Afghanistan, it was very good. Talibanized Afghanistan is, of course, a very, very different entity altogether. So that leaves only Pakistan. There is only one country in India's neighborhood which is intricately linked with China. In fact, with China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, Belt and Road Initiative, these linkages are getting stronger. Right. Although there are apprehensions in China about radicalization from Pakistan seeping into their territory, but their economic interests are getting intertwined on account of CPEC, and this will bring them closer, and that is, of course, a cause for concern, because one of the important components of CPEC is Gwadar Deep Sea Port, where it is intended that at some stage Chinese naval presence would be there. And because if China manages to maintain a permanent presence on Gwadar, it will change the whole maritime security dynamics, because any naval power occupying Gwadar would be able to monitor every shipping that enters or leaves Persian Gulf. Right. At the same time, it will also create a big problem for India, because bulk of India's refining capacity is in Gujarat, and bulk of India's crude oil gets offloaded at Wadinar single point mooring. The sea line of communication which comes from Persian Gulf to Wadinar actually passes just some 40 nautical miles from Gwadar. So it is going to be very, very easy for any naval power positioned at Gwadar to interact with the shipping. So once that happens, the whole maritime dynamics could change. So that is one issue where we need to be concerned.
Extremely interesting. So my final question to you is, India has displayed plans, especially the Niti Aayog has come out with plans to convert Andaman and Nicobar into an economic hub. Now, obviously, this does have a certain security dimension as well. Should we have done this a long time ago, or do you think this sort of a development is in good light?
See, we have had policies which have been one step forward, two steps backwards. When Hong Kong was going to China, there was a huge demand that if we could have created an economic hub like this, a lot of capital could have moved from Hong Kong. Even now, when Hong Kong is facing the pressure and the Chinese are trying to amalgamate it completely, I think providing an alternative economic hub would be very useful. Of course, there are genuine issues as far as environmental concerns, etc. are concerned. So we need to come out with a viable plan, whereby if you want to do it in Great Nicobar, or you want to go to other islands in Nicobar group of islands where you want to set up this sort of a thing, because we have far more land and far more resources than countries like Singapore, or for that matter, economic zones like Hong Kong have. If we would have actually played our cards well, we could have really gained enormously by now. But it is not too late, because what happens is invariably you work out one thing. You want to, Campbell Bay, you wanted to create a free port. The proposal came, I don't know, decades back, still nothing has been done. So unless, of course, we move fast, we will lose out on it. I think it's a very, very good proposal to make Andaman and Nicobar Islands as economic hub. They have enormous potential. Their location is phenomenally good. And Andaman Nicobar Islands also provide India a very good citadel for maritime defense to monitor shipping coming from South China Sea from that place, because Andaman Nicobar Islands are just at the mouth of Strait of Malacca, from where bulk of the shipping is coming. So we can monitor it. It gives us a huge leverage, which regrettably we have not utilized fully. But yes, Indian Navy has started the process, and I think a lot of things are being done. But we need to allocate more resources to Andaman and Nicobar Islands.
Right. Only time can tell us what will happen as far as Andaman and Nicobar is concerned. But thank you so much for joining us today, Captain Mansur.
Thank you.
And I hope you can join us again for a conversation in the future.
Look forward.
Viewers, please do like, share, and subscribe to Chitti Media, and please do let us know what you thought about this particular session. This is your host, Sharan Sethi, signing off.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.